Welcome everybody to day 3 of the film fundraising series. I'm really excited for today. Yes, I will repeat this once everyone is in, but just so everyone is aware, the webinar is being recorded. So if you have, if your internet drops off or whatever other issues you have, you can catch up the information next week. And the session is being BSL interpreted. There's 2 interpreters who will be taking in turns to interpret the session. And if you are someone that would benefit from using the BSL interpretation, if you can make yourselves known via the chat function, my colleagues will be able to promote you to panelists. Don't worry, you won't get seen and you'll still be muted, but just so you have more control over your screen. So yeah, if you would benefit from using that, I'd be really grateful if you can let us know via the chat. And yeah, got a lot of people still trickling in. Great. I think we have stopped the we have stopped with the people, like the numbers have stable. So I think I'm going to make a start because I'm sure you've all got lots of questions and we've got lots absolutely to get through. Yeah, so I'm just going to, just so everyone's aware, the webinar is going to be an hour long, and we have pre-prepared some questions already to ask Neil. So we'll probably be starting with those. But if anyone has any questions they want to ask Neil, you're very welcome to post them in the Q&A function at the bottom of the bar. Don't post them in the chat because it'll get lost. You're very welcome to post them in the Q&A function. Just so you're aware, because I'm sure we've got lots to talk about, it's highly likely we won't be able to get through absolutely everybody's questions. If unfortunately we don't get through to your question, Neil has very kindly allowed us to share his website, and you're very welcome to get in touch afterwards. If you think I could be of use, you're also welcome to get in touch with me. If I don't know the answer, I can try and ask people I know to find an answer for you. But just so you're aware, we'll start answering audience questions at about maybe 1:35 once we've got through some of the pre-prepared questions. So yeah, I think that's everything from me, and let's welcome Neil into the room and make a start. Hi Neil. Everyone's been really excited to have you here. So I thought it'd be really nice if you start by introducing yourself and telling people a little bit about how you got into what you do.
Yeah, so hi everyone, I'm Neil Chordia. I'm an independent film producer. I've been in the UK film industry for almost 22 years now. I started off in film distribution, then moved into sales and financing, which segued nicely into production. And I've been an independent producer probably now for about the last 12, 13 years. And it's kind of been a natural progression of where I started and where I wanted to get to. And yes, it's very interesting times right now. So it'd be interesting to see what questions get thrown up in the middle of a pandemic.
Absolutely, of course. So I think because obviously our series is about talking about one of the most secretive matters in the industry, the financing, that doesn't get talked about very often. So it would be really great if you can tell the listeners about how did you first start learning about investors, and how did you started kind of approaching them and kind of gradually learn about those things?
Yeah, so as I said, I started off in distribution. So basically I got in to the industry very early on. I quit university. At the time I thought I wanted to be an actor, and after a year of literally no training and not getting any auditions, I thought, well, I'll try and get behind the camera somehow. So I ended up writing off to, back in, this is like the late 90s, the BFI used to publish a handbook, and it was literally the names and addresses of literally every single company that worked in film in the country. So I ended up writing off like 200 odd letters to these companies, just begging them for some work experience. And I think out of those 200, about 3 of them came back. And one of them was a company called United International Pictures, which was at the time the biggest film distribution company in the world. So they did, outside of the US, they handled all the distribution for Universal, Paramount, MGM and DreamWorks. So you can imagine it was kind of a bit of a baptism of fire getting into all this, because you're dealing with these huge studio movies and releasing them in, you know, a pretty big market in the UK. So when I started, I kind of figured, like most people, that, you know, studios just have lots of money and they bankroll the films and that's it. And I wasn't really very aware of what the independent market actually looked like. So it was a number of years. I was there for about 4.5, nearly 5 years, and then I moved into to work for a sales agency that were also doing European co-productions out of the UK. And so that was my first sort of introduction to the independent market. And again, I was quite lucky because I got thrown into the deep end. These were fairly big independent productions, mainly based out of the US, but using the UK to take advantage of co-production treaties with other countries. So we're talking sort of, you know, $15–16 million budgets. And so the finance plans on a lot of these things were quite complex because they spanned multiple territories. So quite often you could have a UK, Canadian, Czechoslovakian co-production. And, you know, money was coming from all over the place. It was pieced together, as it still is now. So that was sort of my first introduction to it. And one of the first things I got taught how to do was to do split budgets. So I literally got a budget thrown at me one day by the producer and said, can you turn that into an Excel spreadsheet, but so that we know exactly what's being spent in Canada, what's being spent in the UK, what's being spent in this country, so we can work out tax credits. And from that, you know, I started to learn about financing structures and things like that. And you started to get an understanding of the different types of financing that are available: equity, gap, all these sorts of things, pre-sales, especially, as we were a sales company. And yeah, that was sort of my first introduction to it. And I think that being that close to it, I was very lucky to get that sort of working knowledge of how those sorts of things were put together.
Wow, that's definitely very insightful. That moves on to our next question. Obviously, during the development process of a film or any production, for those of you who might have coming from a more theatre background, obviously during that process, when you're kind of like trying to piece everything together, kind of like finding all the different strings and for it to happen, there is inevitably going to be bad news. Like we all know far too well, it's always going to be some no's before you get those yeses. So how do you manage relationships with those who've said yes to you, for example, early on board, but then like you're kind of like having to taking longer to secure the remainder of the funding, or kind of similar situations like that? How do you manage those?
I think the first thing you've got to do is you've got to know why your investor is investing in the project. And I mean, they broadly sort of fall into two easy categories, if you like. The one are sort of the more corporate sort of finance companies that will look at, they're essentially only interested in numbers. Their motivation for investing in the film is to try and make money. And so therefore you'll find that what they are interested in talking to you about are the numbers. They want to see budgets, they want to see sales estimates, they want to be able to put together recruitment waterfalls, they want to know what their coverages are, they want to know what the bottom line is and what money they can make out of it. And in a way, they're quite simple to manage, because you know that there's no point talking to them about, you know, the wonderful creative side of things. It's going to interest them far less. They want to see the ones and zeros on the page. The other type is the one that's doing it, who doesn't really care so much about what they're going to make out of it. They're doing it maybe for the fun of it, or they're investing because it's exciting to them. So you'll find these tend to be the sort of more, you know, perhaps, you know, rich individuals, wealthy individuals whose motivation is that they want to be close to the artist. You know, they might just get the thrill of being on set. They just get the thrill of reading a script and talking it over with the director. You know, they might love to talk casting decisions with you. You know, they want to be involved in the process. And so I think once you know what their motivation is for being involved, it's a lot easier to manage that relationship. So with someone like that I've just described, you know, there's no point, you know, putting loads of numbers in front of them if they're not interested in that. What you want to talk to them about is the fun stuff that they do, and that's how you keep them engaged. So certainly in the early parts of the process, if they're the first ones on, which are always the most tricky to get in, but if they're attached to your project and you know it's going to take you another 6 months to raise the rest, the way you would manage them is to try and keep them excited. So give them another piece of news each week. If you feel it's their excitement's dropping off, what conversation can you have with them? You know, are you doing another pass on the script maybe, that you say, maybe we'll do this, and try and get them excited about a particular part of the creative? Or you might start talking casting decisions and, you know, try and keep them sort of involved in that way as well, to see if they'll have some insight, and it will just keep them bubbling along.
Yeah, wow, that's definitely very useful. I guess that also moves slightly onto, obviously you talked a little bit already about communicating with your partners to understand why their motives are in backing a project. And for those of you who have been here the last 2 days, all the panelists have mentioned communication multiple times, as we all know. I would love to know, does your communication strategy or how you communicate with your partners, investors, collaborators differ according to what stage of the negotiations it's at and the amount they are investing into a production?
Yes, I think it does in a way. I mean, again, it comes down to why they're investing. But in terms of early on in the process, I mean, anyone you're approaching, you're trying to get them excited and involved in your project. So you are essentially having to sell to them. You know, why should they be involved in your project? So the way you're communicating is you want to give them whatever it is that they need from this. So as I said, the numbers guys, well, you probably wouldn't approach anyone like that until you've actually got some numbers to show them. So if you're going to them and say, well, we don't have a budget, we haven't been to a sales agent, so we don't know the value of the film, they're probably not going to be very interested in talking to you. So, you know, you would wait until you have those things to be able to discuss that with them. With the other types of investors, someone who you're just trying to get excited about it, then you might be able to go to them at a different stage. But essentially you are still selling to them, and you need to know what it is they want out of the project in order to sell that to them. Once you've got them on board, it's about maintaining that relationship. So then it becomes less about giving it the hard sell to them, but just making sure that they feel respected and that they feel involved in the project and they're getting what they want out of it.
Yeah, that's definitely really, really useful. I'd love to know a little bit more. So if you could describe a typical journey that you go on with like a partner or an investor on a project from like the very start to finish, like it'd be really great to know, like whether you evaluate with them once you finish, like it'd be really great to know that journey process.
Yeah, I think with most independent films, there isn't a typical journey. It does vary so much with indie films because there's so many different ways that we end up sort of cobbling a production together. But I mean, it generally does, as I said in the last bit, it generally does fall into a few sort of set areas. The first thing is you've actually got to identify those financiers, those investors that you want on board your project. So the first thing you've got to know what your project is. There's no point approaching a sales agent or a financier that only makes genre film if you've got a very worthy drama and they never make that sort of thing, and vice versa. So you've got to make sure that the people who are approaching it's actually a fit for. So that's the first thing, is to actually do some research and know where your film fits into the market, where it fits into the world of film, and therefore who you're going to speak to. The next thing you've got to do is you've got to come up with some materials and an approach to them. So typically, I suppose you would, create some sort of pitch document. Hopefully you've got a script or a treatment at a fairly well-developed level to take to them. And then you would have to make your approach. Now you can do this via email or Zoom call as it is now, but quite often you would perhaps try and arrange meetings with them to actually go in and pitch the project to them. They may not want to do that. They may just say, send us the materials. Each investor is different. But that's the part, and that's the hardest part of the whole process, is because it's, they get so many approaches from filmmakers wanting to make their films. They can only make a very, very small percentage of them. So what is going to make what is working on this project? And it's probably not even going to be just one little thing. It's going to be, do they like you? Do they like the project? Do they like the people involved in it? Do they think that it could be something? There's so many factors, and it's kind of key early on when you're sitting with that investor, if you can sit with them or you're having a Zoom call with them, to try and figure out what it is they're engaging with. And how you present to them as well. I mean, I don't know that anyone invests purely because they're just so bowled over by the producer's pitch. But it does go a long way to them feeling confidence in you, that as the producer, you're essentially the person they're going to trust with their money. So they have to feel that, yeah, this is a smart person, this is someone I feel is actually going to shepherd this project from the beginning to the end. So convincing them that you're the right person, you can do that through a mixture of your own track record and show, well, I've done it before, so therefore you should feel that level of trust in me. But it's how you present yourself to them as well, and what is it they're looking for, and is it a certain confidence? Do they feel that the worst thing you could probably do, I found, is actually just go in there and just blow hot air at them, and say it's going to be amazing, it's going to win Oscars, we're going to do this, and just over promise everything, because most smart investors will see straight through that, and then you don't come across as someone that they were going to trust with millions of pounds of their money, because it's like there's no semblance of reality here. So then I suppose the next part of the process is, as I said, is once they're on board, is maintaining that and working with them. Now, some investors perhaps aren't as hard work, they're not as high maintenance, they might require an update every once in a while, but they're happy to kind of let you get on with it. Others might be a lot more needy and need a lot more sort of, want to feel that they're getting engagement from you. So are you taking regular calls with them, giving them updates, discussing what the plan and the strategy is? And then of course you've got the back end of it, which is that you've made the project, and now we're talking about releases and where's it going. Get them excited about if you're having a premiere event, or get them excited about the distribution deals that you're doing, because hopefully if they've had a good time on it, and hopefully they don't lose all their money on it, they may come back as well, and you can use them for the next project.
Yes, absolutely, and that is absolutely really useful to hear. Yeah, I guess a lot of our listeners here might be thinking about making a short film, or have already made a short film, and are usually, with, as we all know, short film doesn't really make a return on money, so it's highly likely that it is either self-funded, or you've applied to one of the grants out there and that you get to make it happen. If filmmakers that are listening have an ambition that that idea isn't just going to remain as a short film, or isn't just going to remain as like a proof of concept, at what stage should they start thinking about kind of like approaching and beginning conversations with executives, producers, investors? Is it maybe when they've made everything, or actually at the very start of it? At what stage should they start that process?
I think if you're planning a feature, you want to think these days. You want to think very early on in your head about where the financing might come from. I would say in terms of actually approaching, I wouldn't approach an investor until you have all of your materials as good as they can be. Quite often you probably need it packaged as well, so you'd want a fully developed script. And I would say that if you're still looking at the script and you're thinking about approaching financiers with it, and you're reading the script and going, still needs a little bit of work, I would not send that to a financier. You need to look at it and go, yes, this is the film we want to make, this is ready. When you're at that point, then you would take it to the financiers. Now, often they will want to know that it's packaged, so they want a director on board. They will probably want evidence of a sales agent either interested or on board, or at least in conversations with. They may very well want cast attached, or at least in conversations with cast. And the thing is, you're only ever going to get one. You usually only ever get one shot with investors. So if you go to them and it's not as good as it can be, they're going to read it. They'll mark it on there. Most of them will keep a database or some sort of spreadsheet of all their approaches, and they'll mark it saying, we read this, we passed, and this was the reason we passed, because we didn't like it enough, or this didn't work for us. So then you're in that position where, in order for them to actually consider it again, lots of things are going to have to change on it. Why would they read it again if all you've done is just done a slight revision of the script? They've made their decision. So you really do want them, you really do want your materials to be as good as possible. But going back to what I was saying about in terms of thinking about things, I think these days it has become much harder to make indie films and to finance indie films. And so the process that I used to go through as a producer when I was looking at new projects, the first thing I'd do is like, not do I like it, it's do I love it? And that would be the first consideration. And quite often it would be the only consideration. It's like, I love this project, I want to make it. Now I'm having to sort of almost do that, go, I love this project. Okay, take that cap off a minute and put on my hard producer hat and say, but realistically, do I feel I can get this made? Where am I going to go with this? Because at that point that I'm reading the script or reading the approach, if I can't immediately in my head think of 2 or 3 financiers where I think it might be possible to get this, to get this away with, then I'm probably going to spend years and years of my life on this project and it will never get made. And so it is a consideration. So I think if you've got short film projects that you want to turn into features, I think you need to be very honest with yourself and look at it and say, what is this going to be as a feature film? Where does it fit? If it's a drama, is it something that's going to end up with the BFI, one of the public funders, BBC Films or Film 4? Or is it much more commercial? Is it a genre film? Am I going to go to the US to try and find the money? Or is it a natural fit for a co-production? There's a lot of things, that have come into me over the years that I've looked at, and they've been UK set, and immediately I've read them go, why aren't we co-producing? This should be a co-production. Set this part in India or this part there, because it's a natural fit. It's not, we're not ruining the creative by doing this, but by making those changes, you've suddenly turned it into co-production. And now in terms of getting the thing made, we have a really good idea of some partners we might be able to go to.
Yeah, that's definitely, wow, that's very, very insightful. And as we all know, like, there's no one fixed way of doing it. I'd be really interested to hear your take on the next question, actually. For those of you who are here, we asked this question to Alan Wilson, who is a philanthropic donor. This question: how does he want to be communicated when things go wrong? And his answer was he was just very valuing just honest, transparent and open communication. And he was very, very open. Yeah, if the project needs to happen at a later date, it needs to completely change, he's very open to it. I guess obviously coming from his aspect as a supporter for the love of it. But obviously I'd be really interested to hear your take. For example, like what we found ourselves in COVID-19, things have gone wrong and the budgets have suddenly stacked up. And obviously, you mentioned earlier, a lot of the all investors do look at the budgets, do look at how many zeros there are. How do you communicate these unexpected changes when things go wrong with them?
Yeah, it's always a tricky thing, isn't it? Because in indie film, literally, if it can go wrong, it probably does go wrong. It's it's that sort of job. So we're constantly fighting fires. I think the key thing I've always found when there's bad news, it's actually to try and remain calm. There's nothing worse with an investor or with anyone if you start panicking. You're supposed to be the person holding this together as the producer. If say a piece of your financing falls out and you start calling up all your other investors going, oh my God, they've fallen out, what are we going to do? That doesn't inspire confidence in you, and probably it just start a chain reaction of everyone else falling out. So although you may feel it on the inside a little bit panicky, you need to try and present as calm a front as you can. So when you're talking to those investors, say, look, it's some bad news. These guys have fallen out, but we have a plan, and I want to talk to you about what that plan might entail. And this has happened, this is going back some way, but back in the sort of mid-2000s, I was working on a project. It was a UK-Canadian co-production called The River King, Ed Burns and Jennifer Ely. And it was shooting in Canada, and we were utilising a government scheme, this was before the tax credit existed. There were various government schemes, and one of them was sale and lease back, and then they had this other tax break. And what had happened with it is over the years up to that, it had been abused quite a lot by people calling themselves producers and essentially double dipping on their tax break. And so the UK government had got pretty annoyed with all of this, and literally overnight shut the scheme down. And so one of the financiers that we were making the film with, their method of making this work suddenly disappeared. So they dropped out overnight, and we were in, I think, the third week of prep in Canada on a $15-16 million movie, and about 40% of the finance dropped out overnight, with actors on set, people doing rehearsals, sets being built. And the way the producers dealt with it, again, obviously you can imagine when that news came in that morning was very, very panicked. They went away, locked themselves in a room and were tearing their hair out and screaming and crying, came out of that room, calm as anything and decided, right, well, this is what we're going to do. We can look at some reductions we can make to the budget. We can look at how else we can replace this. So which other financiers do we know that we think might be able to pick up some of the slack here? And within the space of a week, they'd had it refinanced. And I think part of that was, one of the key things there was keeping the rest of the investors happy. And the way they approached that was very, you know, it wasn't the end of the world. We were still going to make this film. We just had to change our approach to it. So I think the way you communicate that info to your investors is really important. And again, you know, as you said, as Alan has probably said, you know, it's make them involved in it as well. It's like make them part of the solution, unless they really don't want to be, unless they sort of go, no, you go away and figure it out. But you'll find that, you know, especially with sort of COVID, what I've heard is that, you know, most people, when something big like this happens, most investors, you would think they're human beings. They'll understand this isn't something you can control. This is something that has happened to all of us, and we're all having to find a way through it. So I think there's a lot more understanding through COVID of what, you know, what the process actually is, and how they can work with you to make sure that, you know, you can remount productions.
Absolutely. That is really, really important to know. Yeah. I guess the next question we'd love to know is, now that you're where you are, you're an independent producer who obviously helps with the financing side of things. If someone listening, or they have an idea, they wanted to approach you, I guess it'd be really good for you to sorry, I word it better. How do you decide, when so many people send you scripts and ideas on a daily basis, of who you're gonna work with? And I guess it would be really good for people to know, if they want to approach either yourself or anybody who is in that executive producer position, how should they make that approach?
Yeah, I approach, you know, projects I produce and projects I exec produce in the same way. So projects I produce, they're ones that I would actually have on my company slate that, you know, essentially, to all intents and purposes, those are my projects as well. When I'm exec producing, I'm coming on board someone else's project. I'm not going to be the driving producer, but I'm going to be someone perhaps who would help with finding financiers or introductions to sales agents, or, you know, whatever is called for that. But I'd approach it in the same way, and that's that I've got to, first of all, love the project, because life's just too short to work on stuff you don't like. You know, unfortunately, it takes so long to get films made that, you know, you're probably going to spend at least 5 years with this. You know, even if you manage to make it relatively quickly, as a producer, you're kind of on it for the long haul, because you have to deal with all the distribution deals down the line. So that's the first consideration, is actually, do I believe in this project? Do I love it? And do I want to actually see it made? And as I said, the second consideration is then, do I actually think I can get it made? Can I help? And so when I'm coming on board as an exec producer, I am being perhaps even more harsh, that I'm looking at things going, well, what's the point of me coming on this if I've got no one to take it to? Or the people that I would take it to, I think, are just never going to be interested in this. So I do have to, you know, it is an evaluation process, and it is really difficult. And I think when people are approaching me, it's a couple of different things. These days, I sort of ask more for log lines in the first instance. And I put a call out for some TV projects about probably 2 months ago now. And I you know, literally, it was a couple of hundred of them there. Most of them are still sitting in my inbox because I haven't had time to read them. And this is only log lines. So unfortunately, a lot of producers are like myself, we're one-man bands. And so we don't have an army of people to read projects. And so you're, on the one hand, trying to run your own company. You're doing things on your own projects, which, you know, in any given week, suddenly this week, for example, something happened on a project that I needed to spend a lot more time on. And so all the plans I had for reading things or doing other things this week have gone out the window. And so now I'm thinking, right, next week I'll try and read some of those. Next week I'll try and look at, you know, the next project. But it is a difficult thing. I mean, and every producer is different in the way they evaluate and what they look for in a project. I'm personally very driven by sort of concept and story. Other producers perhaps are much more interested in you as a filmmaker, and less so in what the actual project you're pitching them is. So, you know, it's a similar thing as I was saying earlier. It's about getting, you know, trying to understand who that person is and what they want. So, and you know, how you find that out, it can be quite difficult, but you can research those people. So hopefully, if you haven't, you should absolutely get a subscription to IMDb Pro. It will give you some insight. You can actually research the types of projects this person has worked on. look at their website, what projects are they working on? Because again, if you look at some of the things I've worked on in the past, some of the things I never would, if it was up to me, I never would have worked on, but I was working for other producers at the time. So have a look at my website now and see the types of projects that I liked, that I'm interested in, or follow me on social media and see sort of the things I talk about. I'm very big into pushing underrepresented voices. So projects that have that at the forefront are much more likely to catch my attention in the first place.
Absolutely, I totally relate to that. I'm an independent producer at a very, very start of my journey, so I don't produce full time because it's always a hustle, and I absolutely get that. You get so many good ideas sitting in your inbox, so I think producers at every level relate to that. I thought I'd point that out. But yeah, that leads us perfectly onto some audience questions. So if you're ready for that, Neil.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so we've got a question from Dan. How can I, as a creative producer with contacts in development, find contacts in financing?
Okay, I'd say probably, if you define yourself as a creative producer, then it depends on what your level of understanding, I guess, of physical production and financing actually is. And I think it's really important. One of the best things you can do is say to yourself, I know what I don't know. There's nothing worse than trying to pretend you know something, because you'll get found out very quickly. So if you know that about yourself, so I'm a creative producer, I understand the development process really, really well. I'm great at working with creatives. I'm insightful working with writers. I can get that script as good as it can be. I can do that. However, I don't really know how to find finance. I don't really know much about physical production. Well, in that case, the obvious answer there is you're going to need some help. So reach out to exec producers, or a producing partner. Find yourself a producing partner. And I was watching the webinar the other day that you had with some brilliant producers who were saying one of the key things to do is look sideways, rather than always looking up and going, I need to get the best possible producer I can on this to mentor me. Look sideways and see, well, are there other producers at a similar level to you who are coming at it from a different angle and who are actually really, have perhaps worked on the sales and financing side, but aren't so hot on development, or they've come up through physical production and can help you in that way. And you can start to forge those relationships, because then as a group of producers, you will be far, far stronger because you have complementary skill sets. Now, hopefully through that and working with those people, you will start to learn other parts of the process as well that will make you a complete producer one day. But again, there's no shame in admitting, I don't know this, because if you can do that, you're actually in a stronger position by getting yourself some allies and getting yourself some, film is collaborative. We have to work with people on all levels, and it's the same in producing. There's no point just ring fencing and saying, this is mine. You should be looking for people that can help you, and if that means sharing your project, but make sure it's with people. There's no point in that instance of bringing on another creative producer. That's probably not a good use of sharing your net profits or whatever. But I would say that's probably the key thing to do, is to try and find people that will complement your skill sets.
Absolutely, that is absolutely very, very relatable. I guess just a very, very quick share. I also, even at a very early career level, we do co-produce with collaborators. So I co-produce my short film with Assad, also who is also on this call, helping to answer questions at the minute. And I use some of my theatre experience to write the funding applications, because I have no experience with short film scripts. So he helped with that, and we made and I'm sure all producers at every level also kind of have this sort of complementary. So I highly recommend everyone to think about that. Yeah. And so the next question we've got is, do you have any insights into post-Brexit, the UK-European co-production landscape?
Right, good question. I don't have any insights. I mean, I think, look, like everyone, I follow the news and I try to keep abreast of what's going on. I don't know. And at the moment, it's the great unknown with Brexit. I mean, I think in terms of co-productions, the co-production treaties we have with other countries and the European Convention, they will all still be in place post-Brexit. They're not affected by the European Union. So your actual ability to be able to co-produce with other countries shouldn't go away. What will make those things more complex, though, are things where you have to shoot in those other countries, and where you might have to bring in actors or crew from other countries, where you might have to bring in equipment. We still don't really know what's going on in terms of, you know, getting carnets for things, work permits, visas, these sorts of things. So at the moment, it feels like that stuff is going to get more difficult. I don't know that it's going to be impossible, but it's certainly going to be a lot more work. I think one of the things as well that it appears we're going to be losing access to Creative Europe and sort of the media funds, those sorts of things. I think that will have quite a profound effect. Although I believe there's a proposition for a UK version of such a fund. So it depends on those things. I mean, I mean, I wish I could answer it a bit better, but I think we're all in that point now where we're sort of, you know, we're a month or two away from this all, you know, potentially a no-deal Brexit, and we don't really know what's going to happen. So I think we're all sort of trying to take it in our stride. I would say, don't panic, but I would think if you've got something that you're setting up as a European co-production, you might want to start looking into things, you know, how work permits work and how, you know, carnets and those sorts of things, and realistically, you know, what sort of things you might need to be prepared for.
Absolutely, yeah, and we can only hope for the best. And I think also staying connected with each other so everyone can just share knowledge when they see it. Yeah, so the next question we've got from Fan, they said, "Hi Neil, thanks for the tip. I have a question about pitching a project to overseas investors. Do you think engaging a local co-producer is a good idea, and what are the potential pitfalls we should look out for?"
Yeah, so this is actually really good as we're talking about co-productions and the like. So I think, you know, the way that indie film has been going over the past, you know, 5 years especially, we've been moving much towards this more collaborative model, and it's the idea of just funding your film out of one country. I think you do need to broaden your horizons a bit, and so bringing in overseas investors, absolutely. I do think engaging a local co-producer is a really good idea. Firstly, just because usually if you want to access production incentives in that country, it's usually a prerequisite that you would have to have a co-producer from that country. I would say as well that, you know, unless you know that country really well, you're probably going to end up needing a co-producer there, unless you know the landscape for film out there, whether that's from the financing perspective or even from the production perspective. You're probably going to need someone who actually is there and understands how that goes. So I think that's probably a really good thing, and it's, again, part of the collaborative process. In terms of pitfalls, I mean, you know, there's probably many, probably too many that we can mention, but I'd say, you know, culturally, you know, culture is quite a different thing. That, you know, in investors from different parts of the world, they react very differently to different, you know, different things based on their own culture. So getting to understand how their culture works and how they tend to present things, that's probably not a bad bit of research to do, because you don't want to unwittingly, you know, make the wrong remarks, or, you know, approach them in the wrong way that they would feel offended or just not, you know, confident in you. So having some insight into that would be a good thing to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Our next question is from Thea. People talk about that, how important it is that writers and directors have a voice, a sense of their taste. Do you think it's the same for producers? And if so, can you describe your taste? What a good question, Thea.
I think it is important for a producer to have taste. I mean, I have quite eclectic taste. I've got to say that, you know, I do veer towards, you know, sort of the more commercial films, if you like. I like genre, I like sci-fi, I like horror, I like thrillers, you know, but I wouldn't say there's a particular genre that I would never do. But I think that it does help for you that if you're a writer or a director and you know the sorts of things that you want to make, then you probably want to approach a producer who either shares those tastes or who can complement those tastes. Because there's no point, again, as we said, you know, it's about finding the right fit for things. If you're approaching a producer who only ever makes, you know, worthy, you know, dramas, and you're approaching them with your shark movie, you know, your genre shark movie, it's probably not going to be a great fit. I don't know what they would actually really be able to bring to that. And I've been involved in projects in the past where we've had a writer who's written a script that was actually quite dramatic and was actually about quite a strong issue. Producers then wanted to turn it into something that resembled a comedy, and a financier who thought it was something else entirely. And the end result was just this absolute mess of a movie, because all the key players in it were trying to do something different. So I think you do want to try and find people who share your tastes. And again, you know, you might end up talking to producers and you might end up really liking them and think they're really good, but if they don't share your vision for a project, it's a really difficult thing to do, to actually say, I don't think you're the right person for it. But it is kind of a key thing, and I'll do the same to writers. That quite often now, with someone, I did this a couple of weeks ago actually, someone pitched me a high-end TV project. And I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take your pitch deck and I'm going to take your pilot episode. I'm going to write some notes on them because I like it, but this is the way I see it. I'm going to write you a set of notes. I'm going to send them back to you, and then we're going to have a discussion and see if we're on the same page. And I wrote these notes. She read them and said, do you know what? They are good notes, but it's not how I see the thing. And we both just mutually agreed that this isn't going to be a project that we're going to be working on together. It's not that we won't work together in the future, perhaps, but you know, it was just one of those things we both realised that we're not going to do any good by collaborating on this. It's not going to end up being the project that either of us wants. So I think that, you know, yeah, producer tastes are important for you to ascertain.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can totally agree with that. We've got a so we've got another question from an anonymous attendee. You've mentioned co-productions previously. Could you elaborate on the advantages and the disadvantages of co-productions?
Yeah, we can talk a little bit about that. So with a co-production, I mean, there are some obvious sort of advantages of co-production. That you actually get to, certainly from the producing side at least, you get to access financing from another country. And it's pretty important, because at the moment in the UK especially, there are probably only a handful of places you can realistically go, you know, for funding on most films, especially, you know, sort of those anything over $1 million. You're probably, you know, looking at a very few select financiers. So it will give you access to that. It'll give you access to tax credits. It gives you a broader base for your film as well, that in terms of selling it, in terms of distribution, that then you've got another territory straight away. You have another territory or multiple territories that should see, you know, sales and distribution. In terms of the disadvantages, some of the things we talked about with sort of Brexit, I guess, are the disadvantages that you potentially have to ferry people over from different countries. So you probably have increased costs in that respect. It can be quite difficult as well with the script that, you know, we talked a little bit about culture, that if you're co-producing it with someone, they might have a very different viewpoint on what works and what doesn't for their territory, for their country. And so you do end up involving more people, I guess, in the development process. And they all want to have their voice. And so that process could potentially get a little bit tricky if you're trying to keep all these co-producers happy and making sure they're all having their say as well. You're also potentially then, for a co-production, you will, if you're going to access funds and tax credits, you'll probably have to get certified as a film in each of those countries. And to do that, you will probably have to go through a point system, and they will mark you for things like the nationality of your director, of your writer, and your key HODs, your actors and things like that. And so you can find yourself in a position where you're actually having to go through and say, our lead actor needs to be from this country, and therefore limiting your casting. So, you know, there is a sort of a bit of a jigsaw to put together there sometimes.
Great, yeah, that's really useful. So the next question we have is, and again from an anonymous attendee, short of looking at box office figures, how else do you suggest we gauge the success of a British independent film? What would you say was the best case scenario for a low budget feature, something to aim for?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because the thing is, there was so much smoke and mirrors that goes on. It depends how you define success, because right now is a really interesting time. You'll see like the AFM's on, and if you read the trades, you'll see literally now, before every market, there are a whole slew of projects that are announced, most of which aren't financed, but it's usually with a piece of casting, because the sales agents are trying to generate interest. But you'll also see a lot of reports about films selling, and it's quite often presented as a mark of success, and it is in a way. But what we don't know about those deals is we have no idea how much those things sold for. So even if a film is announced and said it's sold to the world, it's probably not a success if it hasn't actually sold at the level that the sales agent, the producers need it to. If it's only sold for half the price that was being asked for, that's not really a success. Now, those sorts of figures, they're never released. They're always kept by the sales agents and by the production companies, because why would you advertise that? So it is really difficult to gauge what is actually a success. And then if you look at box office figures as well, what you'll find is they always look like these great big numbers that, it's like, wow, that's done really well. But then when you take off the rental values, you take off sales taxes, you take off P&A costs, you take off distribution expenses, distribution fees, sales agent fees, the actual amount coming back to the financiers and to the producers, they're lucky if they ever see anything on a lot of these things. But the way it can often be painted is it was a success because it did, £1 million at the box office. So I think the only way you can realistically do that, and it is really tricky, I don't know a particular way of doing it, you either have to know people involved and see if they'll have conversations with you and tell you a little bit about what happened, or you just have to try and look and see if you can find information about the budgets. And then you can sometimes for fun, I say fun, but I will actually look and see if I can take some of those box office figures and work out what I think was actually returned to the production, what sort of budget it might have been made for. And again, on IMDb Pro, sometimes it will tell you. It's not always accurate, but it gives you an idea. And you can kind of roughly work out what you think it might have made, where it has sold to. But it is a tricky thing because we are so secretive about it.
Yeah, no, that was really useful. Yeah, absolutely. So the next question we have is from Sam. Which are the best countries to have co-productions with in terms of tax breaks or other avenues of funding?
I don't know that there's a best kind. I think it depends on your project. I mean, one of the first things I say is that, when you're looking at your project, if it's a natural co-production fit for somewhere, if you've got a script that say, a third or more of it is set in France, then the obvious answer is, you would naturally co-produce it with France because you're probably going to shoot it there. In terms of tax breaks and things they do vary, but you can probably find a lot of this information on sort of the British Council website and the BFI websites have a list of co-productions. And again, it's just about research because, you can shoot stuff in the United States. They're not a co-production partner for the UK, but, some states have, 40% tax breaks. Others will have much smaller things. And some of them will break them down into, local labour, local states. Some will be, based on other things. So it is really tricky. It's a really in-depth thing to research. I mean, in the past, I'd say Germany have got a really good system of financing. They use a lot of broadcaster money as well. They have very well-funded regional bodies. So there is potentially money to access there. But I think what you need to do is really think about your project rather than just saying this is the place where I'm going to get the most money, is to think about where is a good fit for your production and then start to research some of those countries and see what the minutiae of the tax breaks are. And you can often find this information if anyone ever goes to Cannes. Hopefully we will be able to physically go there again. If you go to the marquees there, you can go or you can pop in and they'll happily tell you all about their tax breaks. But you can find that information from their local film body as well, which would be similar to the BFI, but in those countries. So yeah, I'd say it's just a research job and trying to figure out, how best. But this is part of the producer's job when you're doing co-productions, is to try and figure out, what pieces actually fit. And sometimes you'll put one thing together and it will just be like, well, actually, why did I do that? That's pointless. This would be a much better thing. And you end up having to sort of, make multiple finance models just to see which one might be best for you.
Yeah, wow, that's really useful to know. I thought I'd give a warning that we've only actually got 10 minutes left. Time flies when you're having fun, when you've given such insightful information to us. So if we don't manage to get through to your question, Neil has very kindly given out his website, and we've already posted in the chat, and we'll send it in the follow-up email as well. And there is also a question someone particularly wants to approach Neil about their project. If possible, I would suggest that we do that. You do that like kind of privately via email, just so we can answer questions that are benefiting us, like more people. So thank you for bearing with that. So the next question we've got is it common for a production company to work with the same sales agency for multiple projects? Would you general approach a sales agent pre-production or once the film has been made?
Okay, I think with the first part of that, would you work with them on multiple projects? It's not unusual. I mean, I think with you know, you build relationships with sales agencies, and so therefore, if they, you know, if there's a natural fit there for you with the sales agencies, it's possible. But I think most sales agencies, they will assess things on a project by project basis, because, you know, they've got to believe that they're going to sell the project. So I don't know that they would sort of come in if you were pitching, you know, 3 or 4 projects to them at the same point. I would think that they would probably only want to work on one of them, because if you haven't yet made the thing, or you're just gearing up to shoot it, when are those other projects going to get made? Are they going to be years down the line? And is there any point in them attaching to it at that point? So I think that, you know, I think it's horses for courses. You know, you really do need to pick the right sales agencies, and it depends on your project. Some sales agencies, you know, again, as we've talked about, some will be very will do dramas, others will do genre. So again, it's about researching those companies and finding out the types of things they want to do. And once you start building relationships with them, then yes, perhaps they might want to work with you on multiple projects, but I don't know that they're going to sort of come in with you on, you know, multiple projects at one point. And in terms of what points, what was the second about, you would approach them. It depends on the level of your film and how the financing needs to be put together. I think if you're sort of a sort of micro or low budget film, then you're probably not needing a sales agent's involvement early on, because you're probably not looking to pre-sell the movie. And also they're probably not going to be quite as interested, because they don't really know what that film's going to turn out to be. Whereas on a bigger project, if you're putting something together for, you know, a couple of £1 million or more, then you quite likely might need to look at some sort of pre-sales, or you're going to need a set of sales estimates to take to your financier in order to, you know, for them to see their coverages. So I think with that sort of project, absolutely you need to start that conversation with the sales agent at the point that you're going to financiers, so that you can bring them all together at the same point. And they will also probably advise you on casting, because at that level, you're probably going to need some level of cast to help sell the movie. And so if you want to cast an unknown in the lead role and your sales agent's going, no, it has to be this, otherwise we've got no way of selling it. And as a producer, that's an assessment you're going to have to make as well. But I would say on the smaller budgets, you're probably not beholden to that. So.
Yeah, that's definitely very insightful. So the next question we've got from Brandon, do you think investors would be more interested in reading a script if they knew it had been through a development with a reputable script editor?
I don't know. I mean, so generally it depends on I think it depends on the financier. So some financiers will have, you know, people whose sole job is just to read the incoming scripts, and so they are almost sort of, you know, development people in a way. They're assessing those things. I don't know that I don't think I've ever approached a financier and said, this, you know, we've done this through a script editor as well. I think you tend to present your package, and I've not really heard it being asked. I think what it will do is it will hopefully give you as the producer and you as a writer that, you know, extra bit of support and some extra ideas into it, so that it is actually as good as it can be. But I don't think it's necessarily going to sway an investor either way. I think they'll read the thing and they'll make their own judgments on it. So I think it's sort of a more of an invisible benefit to the project.
Yeah, interesting. So the next question we have from Hakam, what is your opinion of enterprise investment scheme and advance assurance with HMRC for independent British films?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think we could probably spend another hour talking about this, because I think it was one of the worst decisions that the HMRC ever made, was cutting off EIS and SEIS investment for single projects. So the way we were able to use that for financing films is we could actually get together some investors, put it into an EIS scheme and invest it in single productions. But that was cut off a couple of years ago, and I think it's had a really detrimental effect on the way we finance productions. And so now you can only use EIS or EIS for investment in your company. So it's great if you're trying to build a production company and you can use this money to build your company infrastructure. So you could raise this money, you could hire a head of development, a head of TV, some, you know, assistants and office, you could raise money for development, but you can't then use any of that money to actually production finance the project. So for me, it seems a bit backwards that you could build a company, develop projects, but then if you've got nowhere to actually finance those things, they're kind of, it's just dead, it's a dead end. So my feeling was that, you know, I think there are still some discussions ongoing about whether it could be reinstated for single project financing, but at the moment it's not possible. And I think it's cut off our, you know, unfortunately, you know, equity investing in films is a bit of a lottery, and it is quite tough for investors to make their money back. So when you had EIS offering a 30% tax write-off and SEIS offering a 50% tax write-off, it became quite attractive to investors to say, well, yeah, sure, I'm taking a risk here, but at least I've got some coverage. That's all now gone, and I think it's been really harmful. I think if you look at the figures for 2019 for British independent film production, it was down by, you know, almost 50%, and it's like 45% and I think a lot of that was attributed to the fact that a lot of smaller projects were made using EIS money and SEIS money, and that was cut off for them. So I don't think it's been a positive step in that direction. I think they do need to readdress it, but it's obviously going to take, you know, much bigger people than me to be able to make those changes.
I'm sure if we all come together, things will keep getting better. So we've got a question from an anonymous attendee. Do you have any opportunities for independent producers to join you or your company as part of the production team for future TV and film projects?
I don't have any vacancies at the moment, but it was something I was talking about for about a year and a half ago, and something I do want to do is that I feel that, you know, mentorship for producers. See, I was lucky enough that I got to go and work for a producer who was also my mentor and who, you know, elevated me, who actively pushed me into all of these meetings and taught me about things. And it's the way that as a producer you tend to learn these things, is that. So what I wanted to do is on sort of the next films I make, I do want to hire like an associate producer who isn't necessarily working for me, but someone who is at that level, has perhaps made, you know, a number of high-end short films or has made a very small feature that needs some more experience on a slightly bigger production. And I was hoping that, you know, I have mentioned this to some other producers as well, and it seemed like something that people were interested in, that if every producer who was making a film hired an associate producer, involved them in the pre-production, the production, and, you know, a bit of the other side of it as well, paid them out of the budget to actually be part of that, and you would get a credit as an associate producer on that film. It goes a long way to elevating. So yes, it's something I'm interested in doing. It's obviously, we've got to get the productions up and running or into a place where we can do that. And then I think that, you know, there is an opportunity to help lift up, you know, emerging producers.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% vouch for that. I, for one, I'm currently on the Screen Skills mentee schemes. So I'm like, and it's been really, really useful. And actually, one of my mentors was on the first day of the Producers Roundtable. I'll let people guess which one of them, but it's been so useful. And I'm also on, there's another scheme I can talk about. There's a back in scheme. That's a specific mentoring scheme for anyone who's identified as Black, Asian and ethnically diverse, and my mentor is actually also on this call listening. So and having two mentors are they're very, very different people, and it's been really, really useful. I'm gonna let Neil have the last words, but before we finish off, I wanted to quickly give a huge thank you to our BSL interpreters for interpreting the whole session. I know we talked quite quickly, and they've been absolutely wonderful. I want to say thank you to them. Thank you to my brilliant team at the ACE Effect of answering the questions and helping with all of everything. Also wanted to shout out to the Film and TV charity. They've awarded me the community grant to make this project happen, and I'm very, very grateful for that. And if you're a filmmaker needing some support, please do check them out. They have a 24/7 helpline, and they've also given actually me some money for the Going Places Fund. That means at the early stages, if I need to travel, obviously now a lot of things are done via Zoom, but if there's an in-person meeting that's not in the city I live in, they've paid for my travel and hotel costs, so I'm not out of pocket at the very beginning stages of doing something. So hugely encourage everyone to check out those resources. But I'm going to leave the last word to Neil. If you could give if you could give yourself one piece of advice to yourself when you're starting out, what would it be?
Learn how to make a really good cup of tea. I actually got a I'll tell you. I know we haven't got a lot of time here, but I will say this. The reason I scored the job going from the distributor to working for the producer was that producer interviewed me, and they told me afterwards that when they say that you're going to have to, it's not just the fun stuff. You're going to have to end up doing photocopies and making cups of tea. And I said, well, I actually take making cups of tea very seriously, and I was dead serious about it. And she actually told me years later, she goes, that's actually what got you the job. The fact that you actually meant it, that you said that, and you realised that was an important part of it. So I think, to elaborate on that ever so slightly, it's the, do you know what? It's like, look at it's the little things, it's the details, you know, things like that go a long, long way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much, Neil. You've been really, really generous with your time and so generous with your expertise and knowledge. I'm sure, although we can't hear everyone, I'm sure everyone is very grateful for everything you've shared. I think it's safe to say, on behalf of everyone, we're very, very, very grateful, and thank you so much for your time. Oh, and one last thing, we're going to send out a feedback form tomorrow as well. So if you can fill that out, so that'll be hugely help me and help Neil and help the BFI to evaluate how we've done on the project. So yes. Oh, someone's asking if I can post a chat, things I was shouting about. I will post them because the chat, you can't save them. I'm going to put them in the follow-up email tomorrow that sends out by Jess Loveland from the BFI network, if that's okay with everyone. Thank you once ever so much, everyone. Thanks everyone for joining, and thanks, Neil. And oh yeah, and we'll see you tomorrow for those who are still coming. Tomorrow we have Chetna Kanpasi, who is the Cultural Projects Manager at Croydon Council, approving grants for the local council, talking about how do you build relationships with a local council for your short film projects and things like that. So very, very different perspective. So please do come tomorrow as well. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.